Storm dumped several inches of rain on the region, and more is on the way. With each hearing uncovering additional information and possible witnesses, the House Select Committee, looking into the January 6th Capitol attack, is working to track it all down. Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger joins us on what we should expect next. Plus, the family of a Palestinian-American journalist is asking the Biden administration for justice, why they are accusing Israel of covering up details of her death, and what they want. But we begin tonight with the state of the U.S. economy. It has shrunk for the second consecutive quarter, sparking fears of a recession. Gross domestic product, which measures all spending on goods and services across the economy, fell at an annual rate of 0.9% in the second quarter. In response to these numbers, President Biden today continued to stand by his assessment of where the economy is right now.
And let me speak to one other issue. The GDP, and whether or not we are in a recession. Both Chairman Powell and many of the significant banking personnel and economists say we're not in a recession.
For more on this, let's bring in Nicole Killian. Nicole, as you know, is a CBS News congressional correspondent. Nicole, so good to have you here with us. Appreciate you taking the time. As you just heard, President Biden spoke today about the climate and tax agreement struck in the Senate between Senator Joe Manchin and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, trying to get the economy moving. Where is the White House going from here?
Well, I think the hope, and we heard from President Biden today, really urging Congress to move forward on this package and emphasizing that this is probably the best Democrats are going to get with respect to some of his top priorities, whether that is, new climate and energy programs, whether that is, investing in deficit reduction, trying to lower the cost of prescription drugs. The president also pledging that no new taxes would be raised on families making over $400,000 a year. So the hope is that this really does help to lower costs, address the issue of inflation, and at the same time also deliver on some of these Democratic priorities that the president has campaigned on.
Nicole, I feel like I've been tuning into Red and Blue for months, hearing about Build Back Better, this large social spending package. If you're a progressive in Congress looking at this, what was in Build Back Better that's not in this? What may be on the cutting room floor that disappoints the left wing of the Democratic Party?
Well, there's certainly a lot that's missing. I mean, you remember there was such a huge component of the original package, which, let's not forget, at one point in time was about $6 trillion and came down to about $3.5 trillion. And of course, now we're well under $1 trillion in terms of the amount of this particular package. But look, in terms of investments with respect to early childhood education, universal pre-K, expanding the childhood tax credit, those types of things, providing more assistance for elder care, those were also key priorities, especially that child care issue. I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, that really was one of the key kind of dividing lines with Democrats at one point in time during these negotiations. But again, at this point in time, Leader Schumer and Senator Manchin have spent months really behind closed doors trying to craft this narrower package. And interestingly, progressives aren't offering as much pushback as one would think. I spoke with Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez earlier today, and she told me that she is inclined to support this package, even if it doesn't have everything that, many progressives want. And even though she has been quite critical, especially of Senator Manchin in the past, but she did make the point that she felt that progressives' demands throughout the full negotiation period, even dating back into last year, that she feels that progressives' voices were heard, that they did kind of force Democrats as a whole on some of these priorities and to make sure that they were being adhered to. So from that standpoint, she does feel that, they did have some skin in the game, if you will. She spoke very highly of some of the climate provisions in this package. She said she's still kind of evaluating it, as are many progressives as a whole. But as I said, she said she is inclined to support it based on what she knows about the bill as it stands.
That's intriguing, Nicole, when you have Manchin and AOC, Representative Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Manchin together on a package sounds pretty good probably to your sources inside the Biden White House, so they still probably have to corral some votes. Perhaps Senator Kyrsten Sinema, one of the moderate Democrats who's been mum so far in this deal. But this agreement also came as a surprise to Senate Republicans. What's the outlook right now inside the Senate GOP? Is there any chance they bite maybe one or two of them and join the Democrats on this package?
I think that's unlikely, as much as Senator Manchin today said that this is not a Democratic bill or a Republican bill, it's an American bill. But look, we know from the jump that Republicans have been very critical of Democrats going it alone on a package like this, so much so that Leader McConnell threatened to hold up the CHIPS package, which we saw just cleared the House earlier today, if Democrats move forward with some type of reconciliation plan. And so obviously the timing of everything is kind of interesting to note, because, of course, once that CHIPS bill passed the Senate is when we learned there was this agreement between Senator Schumer and Senator Manchin. And again, just earlier this afternoon, we saw the House advance that CHIPS package. So at this point, it's likely kind of no longer a leverage for the minority leader. But just to your other point with respect to Congressman Ocasio-Cortez, I did ask Senator Schumer earlier today about his message to progressives and whether or not he was worried that any House progressives or House moderates, for that standpoint, could stymie this bill going forward, because we do know that they have in the past expressed concerns and that, really he emphasized that his message was that they really have to unite and they have to stick together. So this is taking some arm twisting on the part of Leader Schumer. I think the bigger demographic to watch, if you will, in the House is more so some of these moderates who really are disappointed that, issues addressing SALT, state and local taxes, that issue wasn't addressed in this package. But again, at this point in time, Leader Schumer said while he would like to have included that, it was a non-starter for Senator Manchin. And basically, again, this is as good as it's going to get for Democrats. And so that's why he's encouraging both in the House and Senate for them all to back this.
Quite a whipping operation for Senator Schumer. Speaker Pelosi. Let's bring in USA Today's Francesca Chambers. She covers the White House for that organization. Francesca, welcome. Your paper has some new polling showing 50% of Americans believe that the country's already in a recession. So how are your sources inside the White House confronting that political reality?
Well, the White House keeps trying to say that the country is not in a recession, definitionally or technically. But even if it is technically not in a recession, as you can see from that polling, Americans are very concerned about the economy. They're very concerned about inflation. Those were the top two issues that voters are concerned about at this time. And so regardless of what the White House's messaging has been, we've seen continued pessimism. In that same exact poll, President Biden's approval rating still stuck at 39%. And so the White House's messaging just doesn't seem to be seeping through to many Americans.
Francesca, foreign policy hovers over everything, including the economy. And President Biden today had a call with Chinese President Xi Jinping. What do we know about what was discussed?
Well, one big thing that a U.S. official says was discussed was a meeting between the two leaders. Now, we don't know when that would take place. The White House says it's still too early to decide that, whether that could be at the G20, for instance, in November, or that would be a standalone meeting. But that was one major thing that came out of it. The other thing that we do know from both sides is that there was tension over Taiwan. Now, Speaker Pelosi may or may not go to Taiwan, but that was certainly an issue that came up, as well as what the United States policy is towards Taiwan, with the White House and President Biden again reassuring China today that it has not changed.
Nicole Killian, Francesca Chambers, thank you very much. The House Select Committee investigating the January 6th insurrection is really trying to fight at least 24 cases in federal court over access to testimony and phone records. Illinois Republican Adam Kinzinger joins us on all that and where he sees things heading next. You're streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming Gender.
I did not realize that you could change your gender.
Realizing how you feel.
You can be a boy, sometimes you feel like a girl, sometimes you feel like both.
Redefining who you are.
Identify as trans.
Gender fluid.
Non-binary and queer.
Is the idea of gender a thing of the past?
And to be yourself, always, no matter what anyone says, I love you.
Are the kids all right? Gender. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
Want to go someplace new? Yeah, you do.
See something new.
Learn something new.
Meet someone new. Nate B in the house.
There's always something new under the sun.
CBS Mornings, weekdays.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging winds.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
People from every corner of America facing challenges.
Everyone is just looking for some type of connection.
Just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to help.
Coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it. We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform, inspire, and brighten your day.
I've been waiting patiently for something like this.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream on the free CBS News app Tuesday mornings.
January 6 House Select Committee Chairman Benny Thompson says the panel has reached an evidence agreement with the Justice Department and its probe tampering with the 2020 election. Federal investigators have warned access to the Congressional Committee's 1,000-plus witness interview transcripts since April. They've wanted that. The agreement marks a significant milestone as the DOJ inquiry into the efforts by President Trump and others to overturn the 2020 election enters a more public phase. Joining us now is Representative Adam Kinzinger, one of the two Republicans serving on the House Select Committee. Congressman, great to have you here. Thank you.
Good to be with you. You bet.
We've been hearing so much, Congressman, about the Justice Department and how it potentially could be moving closer to an investigation, a targeting of former President Trump, possibly even an indictment. What do you know and what can you share about where that all stands?
Well, really, I don't know much more than you all. I mean, you know, in terms of what we're going to share with the DOJ back and forth, I guess I have a few more details maybe, but it's really just how do we work this where it doesn't hamper our investigation, but of course, we're giving the DOJ what they request. The bottom line, though, is they've been very tight-lipped on this, even with us. That's a good thing because we're not a committee that's going after, we can't go after the former president criminally, but I do think we've uncovered some very serious questions that DOJ has to look at and say, does this rise to an indictable level? I got to tell you, you know, either way, there's no good answers to this. I mean, either way, if you indict the former president, there's going to be, that's a precedent-setting thing. But But I think the worst case scenario, frankly, is if we as a country say, look, as long as you don't successfully do a coup, if you fail to succeed at a coup, then we're just going to let bygones be bygones, because that sets the floor. And in politics, when you set a floor for something, you never ever, rise above it again. You always try that level. So I think it's very concerning for this country if we let this go by, particularly if there's evidence.
Congressman, you said precedent's part of the calculation here potentially for the Justice Department, but should it be part of the calculation? What about just having evidence be the calculation?
Yeah, I'm not sure it's part of the calculation for the Justice Department. It is for me in thinking about this stuff, which is, look, I mean, there's real concerns about what happens either way. I think the Justice Department and the Attorney General made this clear when he gave his really first interview on this a few days ago, and which is, look, nobody's above the law. And I think the Justice Department, justice has to be blind. That includes if you were a former president even. It has to look at the evidence and say, did Donald Trump, for instance, specifically know that there was an effort afoot to change the will of the people, and was he part of that? Look, I got into this investigation kind of in the back of my head thinking, well, maybe the former president, went along with it, but some other people drove this. I now fully believe in what we've discovered and, frankly, what we've presented in these hearings, that he knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to stay in power, and he tried a number of avenues to do that, culminating on January 6th, where for 3 hours he resisted a ton of peer pressure, which he's not very good at doing, to actually act. And he wanted to see what would happen before he realized that law enforcement had turned the tide of this, and then he gave mealy-mouth kind of responses. So, look, it's up to DOJ, but I got to tell you, I firmly believe the former president knew what he was doing.
You mentioned something interesting, Congressman. You said you have some visibility into how the DOJ is engaging with this committee as a committee member. In your view, what do the DOJ's requests from the committee signal about the potential scope of their investigation?
Well, I don't know if I can pick scope out of that. I mean, there's obviously interest in people we've talked to. That could, to me, indicate a narrow scope, or it could indicate building a broad scope. I think what's becoming clear, and again, I don't know anything beyond, frankly, what I've been able to actually see in the media with regards to DOJ, but that they are very serious about going into this now. We had some concerns early. We didn't, it seemed like they were prosecuting a lot of people that went into the Capitol, which is the right thing to do, but not the people responsible. Well, now it seems like, whether it's a result of what we've put forward or just kind of natural move on DOJ, that they are kind of taking a look at this and saying, where do we go from here? So I don't know anything really more in terms of the scope, but it does appear that they're taking their job seriously, which we have to have them do.
Is there anything they've asked for that hasn't yet been made public that you could share with us today?
Yeah, maybe, but I couldn't share it with you, unfortunately. So I don't want to get out ahead of what the committee or DOJ says. But, look, I think we've made it clear that to the extent we can, we'll cooperate. We each run our own investigations. And what we want to do is follow through on what the American people told us to through Congress, which is give them answers, give them recommendations. DOJ gets to look at the criminality of this.
You've spent so much time focusing on conservative lawyer John Eastman, his plan to overturn the election, working with then-President Trump. Is that, in your view, something DOJ is certainly focused on based on all the different requests?
Yeah, I think I can say, just by what's out there in open source, that certainly they have an interest in John Eastman. I think they've had warrants out for his phone. They've seized his phone. They want to know what he did. I mean, look, what we presented is a man that I think, frankly, knew what he was doing was garbage. He knew it wasn't constitutional, but was doing everything he could to convince and pressure the vice president, to convince the president to overthrow a legitimate election. I mean, I got to tell you, if attempting to overthrow a legitimate election in this country is not criminal, and no matter whether it's former President Trump or whether it's John Eastman, then quite honestly, I'm very worried about this country and democracy if that's not a criminal act.
The White House Communications Agency runs all phone devices inside the White House. Do you believe there's any possibility there are more audio tapes out there of former President Trump and his calls during the post-election period?
I think it's quite possible. Look, it's whether it's that, whether it's Secret Service, that's something that we really want to focus on over this summer is, what I guess we'll call it the unknown unknowns, right? Or the known unknowns. What are the things that we don't necessarily know that are out there? Man, I'd tell you, 4 months ago, I had no idea that the Secret Service erased their text messages. Unfortunately, we just found out about that recently. I think there's a lot more information to come, which is why even as we write an interim report, the kind of the beginning of putting this all together, this investigation goes full steam ahead because there's so many unanswered questions.
So often this committee has been focused on what you and others have called this conspiracy to overturn an election. Is now obstruction of justice on the table as well for something the committee's probing?
I think that's, for that specifically, it's a question for the Department of Justice. But look, I mean, look at the Mueller report. My goodness, Mueller basically said there was obstruction of justice. It actually, you can, in essence, prosecute the former president for that now that he's out of office. Obstruction of justice doesn't appear to be a very unique thing for this former president. And, if it's the case that he obstructed justice, and if he gets away with that, actually it makes obstructing justice successful. And what we know in this country that we need is for obstructing justice not only to not be successful, but to be punished, because otherwise we can't go forward with fair justice. So we'll see where that develops, but I got to tell you, there's a lot of information that we're finding out recently once these hearings started that we didn't even know we didn't know.
And Congressman, finally, the committee is probing the extent of the 25th Amendment discussions inside the Trump cabinet after the Capitol attack. Give us a real glimpse into how far those discussions went based on your own investigation.
So look, I think, and this kind of got missed in our hearing on Thursday that Elaine Lurie and I led, which is the letter of Eugene Scalia. He was the labor secretary, I believe, or commerce, I think it was labor. And he put forward a letter saying the president has got to come in front of the cabinet. The president needs to do X, Y, and Z. It didn't get a ton of attention, but I read that, and this is just an opinion, I don't know this from any other source, I read that as a kind of a roundabout way of saying you need to come talk to the cabinet because the cabinet has your future in their hands. And as we know, the 25th Amendment gives the vice president and the cabinet the ability to remove the president.
With respect, Congressman, what about Secretary Pompeo, Secretary Mnuchin? Anything new on those officials in the 25th?
I'll say that's coming. We're certainly pursuing all leads on this, but I don't have anything I can report today on that.
But you're trying to talk to the whole breadth of the cabinet, it seems.
We want to know what happened, and we want to know what were the discussions on the 25th Amendment, how serious was it? We've read some accounts and books, but we need to talk to the people.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thank you very much.
You bet.
Former President Trump is asking a D.C. Circuit Court to grant him immunity from all civil lawsuits related to the January 6th Capitol attack. Trump's legal team filed an appeal Wednesday to overturn a ruling from February that holds him liable in litigation related to the insurrection. They argue the former president was acting within the normal scope of presidential activity when he publicly questioned the integrity of the 2020 election. ABC News reports the Republican National Committee has warned former President Trump it will not pay for his legal representation if he runs for president again in 2024. The RNC has reportedly paid nearly $2 million in legal fees for Mr. Trump since October of 2021. An RNC official told ABC, quote, a neutrality policy is behind the warning. The RNC chair said the party must stay neutral during presidential primaries. The former president has considered announcing his 2024 candidacy, a possible one, as soon as this summer. The latest GDP numbers show the economy contracting. That, coupled with recent inflation numbers, has a growing number of Americans concerned about recession. We'll talk to a senior White House advisor about why the administration believes that is not inevitable and what could change that assessment. Plus, a Palestinian-American journalist shot and killed while doing her job by an Israeli sniper. Now her family is asking the Biden administration for justice. We'll speak with the niece of Shireen Abu Akleh next. You're streaming CBS News.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming the internet.
Technology is baked into the DNA of our generation.
Social media, apps, and games.
I like my iPad, my phone, my Nintendo.
Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, it's one click away.
Is growing up digital a blessing or a curse?
There is so much pressure to be perfect.
We need to have conversations regarding healthier usage.
Are the kids all right? The internet, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me!
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to Red and Blue. I'm Robert Costa. Here's a look at some of our top stories. The House today has passed legislation to beef up production of semiconductors following the Senate's lead. The shortage of microchips has hampered production of everything from cars to computers to household appliances. Plus, the U.S. now has more confirmed monkeypox cases than any other nation. More than 4,000 cases have been reported across 46 states, Washington, D.C., and Puerto Rico. The Biden administration is expected to declare the virus a public health emergency within days. New GDP numbers show the U.S. economy shrinking for the second consecutive quarter. This follows a series of interest rate hikes meant to cool down the economy. The president and the Federal Reserve Chair insist that America is not in a recession. Deborah Alfarone has more from the White House.
President Biden met with a group of corporate executives as signals flashed of an economic downturn.
There's going to be a lot of chatter today on Wall Street and among pundits about whether we are in a recession.
The Commerce Department reported the gross domestic product shrank from April through June at an annual rate of 0.9%. The government's broadest measure of the economy has now declined for 2 straight quarters, traditionally a sign of recession. But President Biden says the slowdown is necessary to tackle rising prices.
There's no doubt we expect growth to be slower than last year and the rapid clip we had. But that's consistent with the transition to a stable, steady growth and lower inflation.
With the midterm elections approaching, the Biden administration is pushing back on the idea that the U.S. economy is sliding into a recession, pointing to areas of strength in the economy.
Job creation is continuing. Household finances remain strong. Consumers are spending and businesses are growing.
Even so, Americans are struggling with both higher borrowing rates and stubborn inflation.
I suspect prices are going to keep coming down, but they're going to remain uncomfortably high for a longer period of time than any of us would like.
The economy's last recession lasted only 2 months in 2020 at the height of the pandemic. Deborah Alfarone, CBS News, Washington.
For more on the GDP numbers and the American economy, Gene Sperling joins us now. He is a senior advisor to President Biden. Let's first listen a little bit more to what President Biden said today.
It's important to start with what we know before this morning's report. Our job market remains historically strong. Our economy created more than 9 million jobs since I came to office, in no small part because of the people on this stage. Our economy created more than 1 million jobs in the second quarter, the same period as today's GDP report covers.
Gene, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. You just heard President Biden. Despite what he said, many Americans, as you know, still feel economic pain. In your view, is the United States in a recession right now?
Oh, no, there's no question the United States is not in a recession right now. But that also doesn't mean that people aren't legitimately feeling pain when they're going through the grocery line or at the gas pump. I mean, we're glad gas prices are down 75 cents, in part due to the president's action on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. But there's no question that even though we've had record job growth, even though we've had this very low 3.6% unemployment, the higher prices, the impact global inflation is having on Americans here at home, hurts for a lot of people. All we're really trying to do, all the president's trying to do, is give a balanced assessment of the economy. This is an economy where people are struggling with higher prices, but it's also an economy where we've had, even these last 6 months, job growth that is about the strongest job growth in 6 months in the history of our country. That is not consistent with a recession, but it doesn't mean that people are not feeling the mix, which is glad that there's a strong job market and low unemployment, but still struggling with the higher prices that the president is really doing everything he can to try to bring down. Even if the main job is the Federal Reserve, even the legislation we're talking about today is about lowering drug prices, lowering health care premiums, lowering energy costs. So we want to do everything we can to help Americans have lower costs during this time of higher prices.
Gene, you mentioned the Fed, and it raised interest rates this week again to fight rising inflation. As you're sitting there with President Biden evaluating all this from the White House, do you believe the Fed should be doing even more?
You know, one of the pillars of our economic strategy is to respect the independence of the Federal Reserve. And so what we're doing is giving them the room to do that. You know, I'd say 5 of the presidents in the past, 50 years have lambasted the Federal Reserve when they've sought to raise interest rates to tame inflation. This president believes in the independence of the Fed, so we're not going to comment or criticize on what they do. What we're going to do is look at what we can do, like passing this legislation that reduces prescription drug costs, like releasing the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to help bring down gas prices, like our infrastructure plan that's allowing up to maybe 50 million families in total to have very low cost, if not free, internet coverage. Those are all things that can help lower prices for families while we make this transition from what was a red-hot economy to what we hope is a more stable growth with lower prices, but still preserves a lot of the very strong job gains we've had.
Gina, is the White House confident the Senate Democrats have enough votes on this package?
Well, we all learn to not do vote predictions, just like economic projections can be difficult. What we're making clear today is that this bill is something that the president strongly supports. And what's been interesting, what a unifier this bill's been, we've had some disagreements with some friends of the administration, like Senator Manchin, like my friend Larry Summers, and yet everyone is agreeing on this, from Elizabeth Warren to Joe Manchin, that this would lower inflation, lower the deficit, and it would lower costs for Americans, from energy costs to prescription drugs. So I think there's a lot of momentum for this legislation right now.
But there's so many things going on, Gene, beyond Washington. President Biden spoke earlier today with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and there are certainly fears out there globally about China potentially invading Taiwan. What would that mean if it happened for the U.S. economy?
Well, one thing smart economic advisors at the White House do is not try to pretend they're the national security advisor. So I'm going to let my colleague Jake Sullivan deal with that. What I would say is that when you look at, it is an interconnected world, and no question, part of the challenges with Omicron and Delta has been the fact that China has done lockdowns. There's been other countries that have affected our semiconductors and affected the production of autos and therefore the price of autos. So, we're focused right now on the things we can do. And one of the great things happened today was the CHIPS bill, the semiconductors bill passed. And one of the great things that will do is increase more jobs in manufacturing and production and innovation in the United States to increase the supply of semiconductors. And I do think that will make us less vulnerable to other countries, including China, going forward, and will be a positive force in the long run for both jobs and higher supply and lower inflation.
Gene, just a quick final follow-up to that. Knowing you're not the national security advisor, is the administration, though, preparing economically for a potential sudden turn of events with China?
Again, I'm gonna stay away from commenting on anything that's related to the president's call today with China. As administration, you're always being prepared for everything, but I'm not going to, go any further than that.
Gene Sperling, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
The family of Palestinian-American journalist Shireen Abu Akleh met with the Secretary of State Antony Blinken and other officials in Washington this week to discuss accountability for her death. Akleh was killed in May during an Israeli raid in the West Bank while wearing a bulletproof vest clearly labeled with the word press. Earlier this month, the Biden administration concluded she was likely killed by an Israeli soldier, but there was, quote, no reason to believe it was intentional, end quote. Abu Akleh's family has rejected the assessment and is putting pressure on the administration to conduct a thorough investigation. The journalist's nephew spoke during a press conference earlier today.
Now is the time for action. Journalists should never be targeted while doing their job, no matter which country they're reporting from. There must be consequences for killing a U.S. citizen, a journalist, and most importantly, a human being.
Shireen Abu Akleh's niece, Lena Abu Akleh, joins us now. Tell us about what you would like to see this administration do next.
Thank you so much for having me. We would like the administration to conduct a U.S.-led investigation, a transparent and credible investigation to hold the Israeli soldiers, the Israeli forces accountable for killing my one and only Aunt Shireen. Unfortunately, a few moments ago, we got news. We got word from the State Department that President Biden will not be making this time to meet with my family during our trip to D.C. And frankly, it's very, very frustrating. We flew all the way here to D.C., even though during his trip in Palestine, he was 10 minutes away from our house. He could have met with us there. He could have made some time. And not making the effort to see us while we are in D.C. is even more disappointing. At this point, it's his duty to protect his citizen. It's the bare minimum he can do is to sit with my family and to just talk with us and hear from us directly. Unfortunately, it clearly continues to show that Shireen Abu Akleh is not a priority, even though she's an American citizen. Her being a Palestinian American should not make her less of an American citizen.
You did meet with Secretary of State Antony Blinken. How did that come about? And can you take us in the room a little bit? What was discussed?
Yes, we met with Secretary Blinken on Tuesday. We expressed our disappointment in the way the U.S. administration has been handling Shireen's murder. And more importantly, we also asked for them to correct or to amend that statement that was released on 4th of July regarding the bullet and if shooting Shireen was intentional or not. We expressed how that statement was damaging. There were no commitments, no promises made from his end. He repeated the same statements, the same rhetoric. He made a light commitment to be more transparent with us and to continue to inform us of any new developments. However, there was no clear substantive point made regarding any steps forward. On the contrary, I felt like we left that meeting with more questions rather than having our questions answered.
When you told the Secretary of State to his face that you do not believe the statement was helpful, saying the shot was not intentional, what exactly was his reaction in that moment?
We told him that there's no way a bullet can identify intent. He said, well, you know what? We couldn't determine if it was intentional or not. So this shows there's a clear contradiction within their statements, because even Mr. Ned Price, in a briefing on the 5th of July, he also stated that there was no qualified person able to conclude if it was intentional or not. So how can they make such a statement that is so damaging to the truth and that hurts our case? So for us, we were very disappointed. At the same time, we felt like we weren't receiving enough answers from Mr. Blinken, and it felt like there was still some lack of transparency in what information he was sharing with us.
Did he give you any glimpse into the evidence that pushed that statement forward, in the sense of what they've learned from Israeli military officials or Israeli intelligence officials about what happened that day?
No, until this day, we haven't received any reports, any information regarding that so-called investigation they conducted. However, he did say that he will be talking with the security coordinator and that they will be reviewing the information. However, we're not sure if they'll be able to share anything with us yet. We asked for a deadline. He said he cannot commit to that. So we are still hoping that they'll be able to share something with us, because until this day, I feel we are left in the dark. We don't know any details of that investigation, the so-called investigation, who conducted it and how was it conducted. All we know is it was just an analysis.
Has anyone from Congress up on Capitol Hill reached out to you or your family expressing interest in this matter and in possibly investigating it further?
You know, we met with dozens of members of Congress, senators, representatives, and we feel like we have a strong congressional ally at this point. Everyone we met with has shown us a great amount of support. They've all agreed that there needs to be a thorough, U.S.-led independent investigation to get to the bottom of this, to fully understand what happened to Shireen. I mean, we all know what happened. She was clearly shot by the Israeli soldiers, but it's important, they said, to have U.S. investigation, because, you know, it's very important, and not only for our family, but for the protection of American citizens, American journalists abroad. It's important that we feel we are being protected as American citizens. So we were very glad that today we had 7 members of Congress attend our press conference, and a few others had also sent in their statements. We appreciated it. It showed that it's not just us who are not satisfied with the way the U.S. administration has been handling it, but also senators, members of Congress are not happy. They're not satisfied. This is not how you hold perpetrators accountable. A U.S. citizen was killed by a foreign army abroad, and there needs to be justice. There needs to be accountability. So we will continue our fight and our demand for justice.
Lina Abu Akla, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
A couple of brand new polls show most Americans do not want President Biden or former President Trump to run again. And yet, that's exactly who looks poised to make a go of it. We'll see how the former president's legal issues could factor into a potential decision to run. You're streaming Red and Blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
when weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
House Democrats are planning to introduce legislation next month to ban stock trading for members of Congress, their spouses, and senior staff. The bill would force lawmakers and their families who own them to place them in a blind trust and give control to an independent third party or sell them altogether. Under the ban, Congress members would still be allowed to hold mutual funds. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said last year that she would not support a stock trading ban, but changed her mind earlier this year in February and said she would like to see it done. Her husband, Paul Pelosi, has recently been accused by some Republicans of using non-public information for stock purposes, which the couple adamantly denies. An investigation from Senate Republicans has claimed to uncover a decade-long effort by China to build a network of confidants within the Federal Reserve. The congressional report details alleged Chinese attempts to bribe central bank employees with lucrative contracts in exchange for confidential information. It identifies 13 employees in 8 regional federal banks who they say have connections to known Chinese talent recruiters. In a letter sent to the head of the investigative committee Monday, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell called the findings unsubstantiated and unverified. We are just 100 days away from the midterm elections, and new polls show that neither Republican nor Democratic voters are particularly happy about their options for the 2024 presidential race. In a News Nation poll out today, 57% of total voters said Mr. Trump should not run for president. 26% of Republicans want someone else as their nominee. More than 60% of all voters said President Biden shouldn't run for re-election. 30% of Democrats said he should sit out 2024. For more on what voters are thinking, Doug Heye joins us now. He is a Republican strategist and the founder of Douglas Media. Doug, great to have you here. Looking at that polling information, Doug, both of the recent presidential nominees, President Biden and former President Trump, clearly not doing too well. So what does that mean for both parties as they head into November?
It means for November, look, it's all about the economy still, right? And it's about what inflation is at and what families are going through every day in their lives. It's really for those numbers of moving forward from that. What do Democrats do? What do Republicans do? For Democrats, it seems pretty clear that those numbers are absolutely unsustainable for Joe Biden. There will be a Democrat that challenges him, if not more than one, should he decide to run for re-election and not stand down. One of the challenges I think that they face is post-November. As we go into a lame duck session, as you know so well, Robert, from your time in the Capitol, these are really controversial times on the Hill. There's a lot of legislation that they're trying to get through. They're trying to combine appropriations bills, all kinds of things where you need everything to go right. And so I think any Democrat who challenges Biden, in that lame duck session could really gum up those works. And then for Republicans, they've got to figure out what the next step for the party is as well, whether that's going to be Trump or somebody Trump-like.
Doug, you've worked with a lot of Republicans who have run midterm campaigns in the past. If you were advising a Republican Senate candidate or House member right now, and they're watching the Democrats move toward passing legislation on the economy, on climate, yes, it includes different spending components, other areas of legislation, what would you be telling your Republican candidates about how to handle that? And could it give Democrats a little bit of a jolt?
It'll give them a little bit of momentum because they can demonstrate they've done something. There just hasn't been a lot of legislation that's gone through this year. But I tell any Republican candidate, you continue to focus on those same 3 things that you have been or should have been all year. It starts with inflation, then it's rising crime and the situation at the border. If you hit those three topics and only those three topics, you should do well this November.
But there are other issues out there, Doug. I just spoke with Vice President Kamala Harris. She said democracy is the issue on the ballot this time around. And former President Trump has been at the center of the House Select Committee hearings into January 6th, the attack on the Capitol. And we're also learning in recent days that the DOJ is investigating efforts in Trump's role in trying to overturn the 2020 election. So is there any chance that the DOJ's movement, the congressional probe, could it soften support for Trump and perhaps Republicans with some Republican voters?
It's certainly causing some Republicans to try and step away from Donald Trump very slowly. It's softening his support. I'll tell you, I was in Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri, the weekend before last. I go there every summer, and I noticed this year that there were demonstrably fewer Trump signs. Now, some of those are flags. Some of those were flags about a guy named Brandon. I think you know what I mean. But there were fewer Trump signs than before. There is a weakening in his support, and it's part of the exhaustion that voters have, even Republican voters, that these hearings have really spoken to and caused. But if you're a Republican, you still don't want that distraction. Donald Trump is a distraction. He's threatening to be another one by potentially announcing a run. Your job is to focus on those issues that have caused Joe Biden's approval rating to really go in the tank, and that starts with inflation.
And Trump's still out there on the campaign trail. Do you expect Republicans to still appear with him when he comes to their state in the coming weeks?
Short of any kind of indictment from DOJ or from the state of Georgia, yes, Donald Trump, he may be a diminished alpha dog, but he is still the alpha dog in the party. And what we've seen in primaries is if Trump endorses you, you get a big boost of attention, you get a big boost of fundraising. It may not get you to 50%, it may only get you to 30%, but in a lot of these multi-candidate races, that's enough. Missouri certainly has a competitive primary happening right now. And while it looks like Eric Greitens, the governor, former governor, is seeing his support slip, if you're either of the other two candidates, you'd love to get the Trump endorsement to get you over that line, no doubt about it.
Doug, you mentioned that Trump could jump in the race. I've covered you for years, talked to you for years when you were at the RNC, working for top congressional Republicans. What's the real chatter behind the scenes among those in power about Trump getting in early? Does it actually freeze the field, or are people saying behind the scenes to you at the high level, it doesn't really matter? DeSantis, Governor Youngkin of Virginia, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, others, former Vice President Mike Pence, they're all still going to run regardless?
Well, the first thing it does is it affects November. Democratic voter enthusiasm is really low right now. Every poll shows it, and those numbers on Joe Biden certainly speak to that. So if you're a Democrat and all of a sudden Donald Trump goes into the fray, both feet forward, that's going to give a boost of enthusiasm to Democrats at a time when Republican congressional and Senate candidates, gubernatorial candidates, don't want it. Congressional leadership on the Republican side is very nervous about this. On the presidential side, moving to 2024, it does put a little bit of a freeze on these Republican candidates to announce. They'll have books come out. They'll visit Iowa and New Hampshire. They'll do those things that candidates do, except announce, at least initially, because they know that the first person who announces is going to be directly in Donald Trump's sight. And he has the good opportunity of taking them out, just given how we've seen him do that systematically to Republicans in 2015 and 2016, and really since then.
Doug Heye, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We're going to take a quick break, which means you have a couple of minutes to download the free CBS News app on all your devices. You can catch live local coverage from across the country from all of our CBS stations. And while you're at it, check out Paramount Plus. We've got a mountain of content for you to stream there as well, including your favorite shows, movies, and sports.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming the internet.
Technology is baked into the DNA of our generation.
Social media, apps, and games.
I like my iPad, my phone, my Nintendo.
Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, it's one click away.
Is growing up digital a blessing or a curse.
There is so much pressure to be perfect.
We need to have conversations regarding healthier usage.
Are the kids all right? The internet, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app.
The Mega Millions jackpot is now over $1 billion after no winner was declared Tuesday. The next drawing is Friday at 11 p.m. Eastern. Tickets are available for purchase in 45 states, Washington, D.C., and the U.S. Virgin Islands. Mega Millions is warning players to be aware of a growing number of scammers posing as lottery employees in attempts to steal money and personal information. That does it for today. You can stream Red and Blue Monday to Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. And a reminder, if you want to watch previous episodes of the program, you can see them anytime on the CBS News website. Just head to cbsnews.com/red and blue.
CBS News Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley on CBS.
You ready? A generation of kids opens up on CBS Reports.
I just want to be like a regular kid.
Their world, their struggles, their voices.
What if I was white?
A lot of people like to call names and make you feel ashamed for being proud of who you are.
Now streaming the internet.
Technology is baked into the DNA of our generation.
Social media, apps, and games.
I like my iPad, my phone, my Nintendo.
Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, it's one click away.
Is growing up digital a blessing or a curse?
There is so much pressure to be perfect.
We need to have conversations regarding healthier usage.
Are the kids all right? The internet, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather is about to get extreme.
We're talking about hail, we're talking about tornadoes, damaging wind.
Every second counts.
Let's now take a look at what that really means to you.
That's why CBS News and the Weather Channel have come together to bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
We can show you what it's going to look like when the storms come through.
You'll see what will happen, where it will happen, before it does. Feel the forecast on CBS News. Time to get prepared.
I'm Nora O'Donnell in our nation's capital. We're here at the White House with the President of the United States.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
You've never done an interview like this before.
That's correct.
Tonight, a congressional investigation sparked by reporting from CBS News. What's your message to consumers?
They need help now. Tell him I feel it.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell from Washington, D.C. on CBS and streaming on Paramount Plus.
We will witness yet another moment in history.
We have an inspiring story that started with a strange act of kindness.
Yeah. We found it.
You're kidding me?
We got it.
We share stories that lift you up and brighten your day.
The Uplift. Stream on the free CBS News app. Americans across the country react to the Supreme Court's ruling on abortion, understanding the landmark decision and its impact. For continuing coverage anywhere, stream on the free CBS News app.
everyone, I'm Ben Tracy. Thanks for joining us. Here's a look at the top stories we're following right now. U.S. GDP drops again, why the Biden administration is still saying a recession is not inevitable. Mick Mulvaney testifies before the January 6th committee what information